God shows up in judgment. God shows up in wrath. God shows up in destruction. And it's not the Jews He's after. He's after His Son. He's come to judge His Son. Not for His sins, for your sins. He's pouring out His unmitigated wrath on His own Son, a wrath you deserved, a wrath I deserved. That's the price. The price due for all the spiritual malfeasances of everybody who'll ever believe in Him, sinners one and all. That's what grace costs. Physical suffering, emotional suffering, and now spiritually bearing the wrath of God, and still yet more. The final price. Verse 34. At the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is translated, my God, why have you forsaken me? So significant is what Jesus says in this moment that God's inspiration of the gospel writer said, be sure and write it down just like He said it. And here I think we expect God to grant us some insight into what Jesus' words really meant. He takes the time to translate it into a language we can understand, but He doesn't really tell us what He meant. What did He mean when He cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? There's nothing to guide us here into what these words mean. Nothing. No commentary given here or by any other gospel writer that says, here's what He meant when He said that. There's nothing in our own experience that remotely could come close to it, so we can't relate to it in any way. One commentator says this, there is mystery here beyond our comprehension. And I would just say we probably ought to leave it there for the most part. But we do need to be careful, the kind of care you apply when you're treading on holy ground, and be sure you don't hear Him say something He couldn't possibly have meant. He couldn't possibly mean the Father wasn't there, because He'd have to not be God to not be there. And the Father would later say that the Father was in the Son reconciling the world to Himself. So He didn't possibly mean the Father wasn't there. With all the mystery applied and all the care we should take, I do think we can say that the presence of the Father wasn't there. Meaning Jesus had no sense of relief from the presence of the Father there. And He certainly wasn't there in this moment in any way that brought Jesus any comfort. And so He cried out. You see, the dark clouds of judgment had descended on Jesus' soul and completely obscured any light of the Father's face. John Calvin reaches into this moment, and here's what he says. If Christ had only died a bodily death, it would have been ineffectual. Unless His soul shared in the punishment, He would have been the Redeemer of bodies alone. There is mystery here, impenetrable mystery. In the divine human Jesus, there is only a consciousness now of abandonment, as though He's been cast out, as though in His soul He is outside of the embrace of covenant love and reassurance. And Calvin goes on to say, we will never experience the kind of wrath that Jesus is experiencing here. This is total. This is all that there is to the wrath of God. He is in the place of the wicked damned, and His Father isn't there to wipe away the tears, even as His Father longed to do so. Christian, do you understand this morning? That's what grace cost. That's what it takes for a sinner to be justified before God. Jesus had to pay a price we could never pay.